So I will hand it over to Odell now, and he will take us through the kind of three major significant disruptions we talked about: the demand shock, the supply shock, and the supply network disruptions. And he will take us through several examples. Over to you, Odell.
Okay, thanks much. Dan, appreciate that. First, I'd like to, as Dan mentioned earlier, we have a lot of supply chain subject matter experts in our organization, and several of those guys worked on putting this presentation together for us. So wanted to give a shout out to those guys. Appreciate that. And then these industry verticals that we have all of this different expertise in help to shape a lot of these solutions that we provide to these different clients. So what we're going to do, this is not going to be a demo, but it's rather going to kind of be a process overview. It's system agnostic, and we're going to look at the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about how to contact us for details on free demos and evaluation services that we can put in place to help rapidly respond to some of these disruptions. So we're going to look at three specific supply chain issues, disrupted supply networks, and then we're going to look at some situations where we have some supply shortages, where we got this excess demand all of a sudden. And then we're going to look at the inverse of that, where we got some supply excess and what some of the things that can cause issues with supply excess would be as well. So this first issue that this slide is on is about disruptions in the network. And this could be for raw material or finished goods supply from vendors or contract manufacturing. It could also be in something related to outbound logistics, getting your product to your end customer. So there's kind of a perfect storm of disruptive forces that are hitting each one of these companies' supply chains at the same time. And as Dan mentioned, it's not something that's ever been experienced here before on a global scale with all of these vectors coming together. So there's a supply shock with manufacturing and shipping crippled from some of the overseas manufacturing suppliers, specifically China, since they were the first ones hit, and they shut down their entire country to support this right during the middle of the Chinese New Year. And so that obviously sent a supply shock through the rest of the supply chains before anybody else started even experiencing this. And then you've, on the other side, you've got these demand shocks where some customers' business just completely dried up. Restaurant food distribution is one example, or the airlines are another example, while others skyrocketed. Our friends in the paper and pulp industry couldn't produce enough toilet paper and still can't. And then in addition, there's other things like expedite cost increases, right? Where you've got demand and supply that are not matching, and you have to expedite things. Then there's also a situation where you've got government intervention and border and port closures because of the health and safety issues that are going on with, and that effectively reduces capacity. So next slide, please. So what we're going to do is we have a couple of slides on each one of these issues, and I kind of just wanted to do this layout for you real quick. We're going to be looking at some issues and their impact, and then some mitigation strategies, and then a little bit of some possible action plans that you can put in place to address those strategies. And then what we'll do in the next slide is we'll drill down into some details on one specific example and just show you what some things are that we have seen before and that we're currently helping customers with. And these obviously are going to be client and disruption-specific solutions that we're going to have to address. So they're very flexible, but just to give you an example of how we can address those. So in our disrupted network scenario here, we've got a situation where we've got some port closures, like I mentioned, for health and safety, as well as just government reasons. We're going to have to evaluate that transport network and see if there are alternatives that might be in place for us to do that. And we actually are currently helping one of our existing customers deal with just this exact situation because of the COVID shutdowns. It's affected their capability to transport materials. And so they're looking at doing simulations and being able to drive some of those decisions via simulation, where they can estimate what the cost impact of that's going to be before they make that decision. And it's provided great value to them. Another example are price changes, where we're going to make proactive decisions about cost absorption, or being able to actually raise the price to the end customers. Being able to use scenario planning to make those decisions about that elasticity of demand and how to get that competitive advantage are really important. And then increased lead times is another big impact, and having to try to proactively manage vendor and customer shipments. Being able to use alerts and dashboards for evaluating your critical components and your A products. Those likely will change, and so being able to reevaluate the future product mix and requirements when the demand of your products change drastically during one of these disruptions is another thing that can help you focus on the critical products and any lead time adjustments that are having to be put in place because of that. An example here in the shelf space area is with this increased demand of toilet paper. It requires so much warehouse space for these big packages that in some cases that impact of that would require you to maybe increase shipment frequency, where you would normally only make a couple of shipments from the DC out to the stores a week. Now you may have to schedule one a day in order to be able to keep the shelves full, and then also have availability for the other products that are required in your transportation network. Next slide, please. Okay, so what we have here, if you'll focus on this, on the blue and the green, we've kind of already covered in this supply disruptions. We've covered the impact and the mitigation strategy. And what we're going to do is we're going to focus here on the action plan and the specific tasks that support that action plan. And we're just going to focus on this route determination based on port constraints. So the capability of being able to put in short-term, medium-term, and long-term action plans and tasks that support that action plan is important, because as Dan mentioned, we don't know how long this is going to last. So being able to evaluate the risk and then determine what might be a short-term plan action, what might be a medium-term, and what might be a long-term is important to be able to estimate where you need to focus your limited resources. So that's what we're gonna kind of focus on, some different options here. So doing optimization in a version simulation for these different port options is in the margin analysis that uses these additional transport costs. Has allowed, like I said, in one of our existing clients, has allowed them to be able to make these difficult customer allocation rules for constrained supply. And the only way you're really able to do that is to be able to do scenario planning, with these different costs, and to be able then to collaborate with your customers and make the decisions that are necessary for them to be able to keep their operations going. Based on these scenario planning results, then we're going to come out of that with some updates possibly to some master data, some transactional data where we're looking at maybe changing our forecast or our container volumes. We could possibly put in new configuration that looks at some different forecasting methods, and you can always look in a more long-term, possibly even addressing in your process re-engineering piece of addressing your sourcing policy and processes based on that what-if analysis. So again, remember, if you've got any specific questions about these tasks, just put them in the chat, and then we'll take a look at those, and we're logging those, and we'll address those at the end of the session. So next slide, please.